Well, welcome to today's webinar, and thanks for joining us. I'm Larry Van Tassel, head of the Department of Agricultural Economics and director of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today's webinar is part of the Center for Ag Profitability's weekly series, usually happening live every Thursday at noon Central Time. Over the next hour, we'll look at the Growing Climate Solutions Act of 2021, which was adopted by the U.S. Senate on June 24th. It seeks to make it easier for farmers and ranchers to participate in voluntary carbon credit markets and to get a fair share of the carbon credit revenue they generate. If the act is adopted by the House and signed by the President, it could go a long way in facilitating effective producer participation in U.S. carbon markets. Presenting today is Dave Aiken, a professor and agricultural law and water specialist here in the Ag Econ department at UNL. Dave, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. Okay, does that look right?
Looks good.
Okay, we're going to talk about the Growing Climate Solutions Act today. And we're going to go over the major provisions of the bill. It's been passed in the Senate, but it's not passed in the House. And if you want more details, there's a pretty good written summary that goes into more of the details than I'm able to today. And I think Ryan's going to post that with this webinar when that page opens up. But one of the things that will happen first is that the USDA, in cooperation with EPA, will conduct a study of the voluntary carbon markets that'll identify, what some of the problems and issues have been and what are some of the things that need to kind of get fixed, frankly, to make it a bit more farmer friendly. Then there will be USDA will appoint an advisory committee. Over half the membership will be farmers and ranchers and forest land owners. So there'll be strong ag representation on that committee, and that committee will oversee the certification of technical assistance providers and third-party verifiers. And that, you're saying, what the heck is that? Well, we'll explain that when we get to that part of the talk. Then we'll talk about practices identified in the Senate bill that suggest that these could become eligible practices down the road. They'll talk about the USDA website where certified technical assistance providers and third-party verifiers, that's a mouthful, try saying that fast, where they will all be listed so that if producers want some help, that'd be one place to go. And then there are some producer protections in the law that certified folks would need to follow when they work with farmers and ranchers. Then we'll kind of take a look at, how does this fit into the big picture in terms of climate change, because the whole point of these carbon markets are to reduce carbon emissions to deal with climate change. So we'll take a look at that aspect of it as well. Okay, right now the current situation is some farmers are selling carbon credits for the annual increases in carbon sequestration to businesses and to individuals seeking to reduce their carbon footprint. And in my opinion, the main reason we're talking about this in 2021 and weren't talking about it in 2020 or 2019, 2018, is that there has been an increase in corporate sustainability goals and carbon credits. Buying carbon credits can help corporations meet these sustainability goals, at least in terms of their carbon footprint. And then the Biden administration is trying to get some new laws enacted that would authorized that to try to reduce the carbon in the electricity sector. And people who are watching this professionally understand that if the carbon regulations from the Biden administration are adopted, then that there will be a stronger market for these carbon credits than there has been in the past. Now, this market is very, very unclear. You know, there's no you can't look in the newspaper or go online and find out what carbon credits are selling for. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how this market works, what the prices are, and everything else. But these sales are all private sales, and there's no type of disclosure requirements. And so Congress, or at least the Senate, in an attempt to try to make this market more transparent, especially more transparent to farmers and ranchers, the Senate has adopted the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And so that's one big step in terms of turning this into law. But it's got to get past the House and then get through the House, and then if the House and Senate agree on the final version, it will go to the president. If it would go to President Biden, I'm pretty confident that he would sign it, because he wants the ag to be included as part of the U.S. Total efforts to try to deal with climate change. Okay. It was the bill was passed, a few months ago in June. Deb Fischer was one of the co-sponsors, but it's co-sponsored by 54 senators. So it had bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats, mainly from ag states, supported it. And they want to make it easier for farmers and ranchers to participate in carbon markets, and find out what these carbon markets are, because that's why we're having these. Why we've had so many programs on carbon this year is that nobody really knows what they are, and if this law is passed, we'll get a clearer window into what they are, how they operate, and all of that. And also, the Senate bill wants to make sure that farmers get a fair share of the credit of any revenue they get for selling carbon credits, so that they get their fair share of the money. And if something like this is adopted in the end and becomes law, then I think it would really help. It would be easier for people like me to explain what the markets are, and it would be easier for producers and their advisors to get better, more up-to-date information about what's happening in the carbon markets and who can participate on what terms. Okay, the first thing, and this kind of surprised me, because I had read a lot of other people had taken a look at 1251 and they never mentioned this, but in their write-ups. But the EPA and USDA would be the lead agency, would conduct a pretty thorough study of the voluntary carbon markets. They would look at, what have these markets been like, looking back the past 4 years, and then what do we think is going to happen in these markets the next 4 years looking ahead, and assuming that the federal government is trying to wring more and more carbon out of the economy, that will factor into these projections that USDA would make. And the reason EPA is in on this is that EPA would likely be involved in any sorts of carbon regulations. And also EPA has several programs where there are similar types of markets that operate for different air pollutants. And so, carbon would be a new one for it. And it would be a lot bigger than the other air pollution markets that EPA operates, but EPA has a couple of them that have operated very well, which is why there's more interest in doing something like this for carbon. And the study would look at what have been the problems or the issues associated with measuring and verifying carbon sequestration on farms and ranches, and carbon savings associated with other practices like fuel changes or going to less tillage, stuff like that. And then identify complications for small, beginning, and socially disadvantaged producers. And then they would look at, what can USDA do to help make measurement and verification for carbon sequestration in ag lands better, more robust and not so expensive to do. And I think that NRCS has been working on that already, but hopefully Congress would provide some money to USDA to push that forward to make this measurement and verification easier, because that is one of the big challenges. In addition, looking at how do existing carbon markets take into effect ag challenges, the annual and seasonal challenges that farmers and ranchers encounter that could affect carbon sequestration, and and then look at things that are important in the credit markets, the carbon credit markets, verifying these, making sure that there's that you're not paying for stuff that was already there before. You're paying for new carbon storage in the soils, ensuring that once the carbon's in the soil, that it's going to stay there for a pretty long period of time. And then, given how ag varies across the United States and the amount of rented land that we have in the United States, what sort of challenges do those pose for carbon markets, and can we influence those carbon markets to try to make it work better for, make it easier for example, leased land to be participate, those operators and owners participate in these credit markets. Permanence, forest credits have been a big part of the carbon markets, and we'll see why a little bit later in the webinar. But we've had all these wildfires, and these wildfires have burned up forests where the forest owners have sold carbon credits, saying that these forests were going to, continue, storing carbon in the soil. But when the forest is burned up, unless they get in there and reforest real quickly and stuff like that, there's going to be some issues in there in terms of how much carbon credits are really being generated. And then business arrangements, the leased land issue is the big issue, and so they're going to have to hopefully, persuade the carbon markets to come up with opportunities to where leased land could participate without a whole lot of extra hoops to jump through. Then they'll take a look at, whether the current carbon markets, are flexible enough to look at things that, production events, like floods or wildfires, or in some parts of the country, hurricanes, that kind of stuff. Whether there is some way that carbon markets can take those risks into account. And so this study, it'll be great for people like me who want to try to explain carbon market to farmers. If I had that study right now, I could do a great job in explaining these carbon markets, how they've operated and what they're expecting in the near term future. And so I, for one, hope the law gets passed and USDA gets to work on this, because this information will be very great in terms of how do they work and how can we help them to work better and try to make them more farmer friendly. Okay, then USDA will set up an advisory committee, and they oversee the certification of the technical assistance providers and the third-party verifiers. You can probably guess what the third-party verifiers are, but we'll get to that, I think, in the next slide. But farmers and ranchers and forest owners will be will be the majority of the committee. Other representatives include people who are experienced in the carbon market, both on the buying side and the selling side, and then representatives of land grant universities. Okay. The certification program will be voluntary, but it will allow individuals and companies, who want to work with farmers and help farmers and ranchers participate in these carbon markets. They will be the folks that farmers would go to. So the technical assistance providers, and I just call them providers, from here on out. They will help them help farmers and ranchers to participate in carbon markets in a variety of ways. Help them. How do I increase soil carbon storage? How do I generate carbon credits? And it's 1 ton of stored carbon is 1 carbon credit. I think it's a metric ton, but that's pretty close to a regular ton. So how do you verify it, and how do you participate in the carbon markets? That's the technical assistance providers. So they're the people right now who are probably contacting producers and saying, we'd like you to participate in the carbon markets and with us. And so that would be who they would be. And then the third party verifiers, they would be the USDA certified people who would certify, measure and certify the soil sequestration or the other carbon savings. And we'll look at those when we get to the different practices that the Act mentions as being ones that USDA should take a look at. Now, providers and verifiers would not be required to be certified under the law. It's voluntary, but only the certified ones would be on the USDA website. And that website is I think is going to be a great marketing opportunity for these folks, to say, yeah, we'll work with farmers in these states or ranchers in these states, or whoever it is, and here's a brief description of our program. And farmers and ideally farmers and ranchers will be able to go to this and find out who works in their area, what practices do they work with, what payments, do their payments look like and stuff like that. That'll all be on this one USDA website. Now you about have to go to every single one and look at their website, and there are dozens of them out there. And that's, unless you need something to do over the winter, that's not a whole lot of fun. So I think there'll be a lot of incentive for if you want to work with farmers and ranchers. If you're in the carbon markets and you want to work with farmers and ranchers, then becoming USDA certified would help you get into that ag market. That would be really good. Now, farmers would not be required to work only with certified providers or verifiers. They can work with whoever they want, but these certified ones would be out there. And that would be good because they will have agreed to treat farmers in certain ways and stuff like that, and the farmers will have some confidence that they have at least some level of expertise that's been verified by USDA with regards to all the different aspects of participating in the carbon markets. And who might become certified? If you remember how do I store more carbon on my land? That's something that Extension and land grant universities are working in. I could see. So that's an interesting question. What about conservation districts? If they're encouraging farmers to plant cover crops and stuff like that, they might see it in their interest to go through the training and that sort of thing. So, I mean, who knows? It may be just folks from the public sector, but there may be some certified providers or verifiers from the public sector as well. Excuse me. I think I said that backwards. It could be just people from the private sector, but there could also be people from the public sector as well. There we go. Okay. Now, these are, there's a laundry list of potential of activities or practices that could be carbon credit generating down the road. And if you go to the handout from that Ryan is going to post with this, I've got the complete list there, so you can look at it. I've tried to group it in areas here, but all the ones dealing with land or soil, carbon sequestration, reforestation, forest management, preventing conversion of forests and grasslands and wetlands, and those actually score pretty high as far as carbon credits, just for your information. Wetland and grassland restoration, grassland management, and NRCS conservation practices. Those are all listed in this law, or in this bill, excuse me. I want to call it a law, but it's not a law yet. But then they're going to be looking at basically emission reductions from energy use. So that could be, if you go to practices that use less diesel, for example, going from conventional till to conservation tillage or to no-till, that's less field, trips through the field on the tractor. So you've got some fuel savings there that could be carbon credits, down the road, if things get set up that way. Also, a reduction of fertilizer use, or if you use manure on your land for nutrients, those, if you are more careful in how you do it, or do a better job of timing fertilizer application, for example, or something like that, those things can lead to reduced greenhouse gas emissions and carbon credit generation down the road. Then on the livestock side, anything that does to reduce livestock greenhouse gas emissions, and that could be from feed changes or feed additives. And then they also have pasture management practices. That's probably should be up on the soil sequestration one, and then other practices proposed by USDA and approved by their advisory committee. So, they're looking at carbon sequestration in the land. There's no question about that, but they're also looking at other aspects of ag production to see if there are some ways that we can save energy, reduce greenhouse gases, and get some carbon credits for that as well. Now, I would expect that since USDA is going to be, if this Senate 1251 becomes law, and that's the list that's in the law, and USDA is still doing the study, they will be, I expect they will come up with measurement and verification protocols for all of those things. And then that's what these, the verifiers, they'll have to become experts in to get the USDA certification and so forth. And the more rigorous these protocols become, the better price, frankly, these carbon credits will get on the private carbon markets, because they're, and conversely, the looser these verification the verification protocols are, then the less credibility these credits are going to have on the carbon markets. So these, how good the measurement and verification is is very important in terms of determining what are the values that these carbon credits can get on these markets, because these markets are going to be, it's going to be willing buyer, willing seller. Nobody's going to have to buy these things. So the better ones will command a better price. And okay, well, and I'm speculating here, but it could be that when they do the certification, you could be certified for some stuff, but not necessarily for everything that's on the list. Either on technical assistance side or on the measurement verification side. You could be good for soil carbon sequestration, but not for reduced emissions from improved livestock manure management, for example, or something like that. Now, over time, you would think that the firms that do this, they'd want to be certified for everything. But it all depends. Frankly, a lot of it depends on what happens in the next few weeks in terms of the U.S. climate policy. And if we don't get off the launching pad, then the carbon markets probably won't get very, very high off the launching pad either. Okay. Now, this is something, again, this is something I didn't see in the other people's write-ups about this, about the 1251. But they have some producer protections in here that I think are very significant. The certified providers and verifiers would have to act in good faith, which means they can't try to cheat or mislead their, the farmers or ranchers that they're working with. They have to be honest with them, and they can't, they can't play hide the ball. They have to provide realistic estimates of costs and revenues. They have to ensure that producers receive a fair distribution of carbon credit revenues. And again, if these carbon markets take off, I can see that in time, USDA will have regulations in terms of what constitutes a fair distribution. And, that's the language that if this became law, that USDA would work with. And certified producers would have to follow the USDA rules, including these producer protection rules. And people who are not certified would not. I mean, they could. And if there are a lot of certified technical assistance providers out there, and they're getting a lot of the farmer market for these carbon credits, then I think they would, the non-certified folks would want to say, well, here's our code of ethics, and here's what we do, kind of to meet the competition that these USDA folks would have. And so I think that would be I think that's a significant, and I think it'd be very, from a producer perspective, it'd be very important. Okay, so just to clarify, USDA would not be regulating carbon markets for farmers and ranchers. They would have no regulatory control over these markets. However, they would certify, the producers and the tech assistance providers and the verifiers. And hopefully that would push others who are participating in the ag side of the carbon markets, push them to basically meet the competition that the certified folks would have. And it's also hopeful, that if a lot of the people in the ag side of the credit market became USDA certified, then that, I think in the long run, that would be very good for producers. I think they would get a better shake than they might just working with somebody who was not certified. And, I would expect over time the private carbon markets, they have their own professional associations, and they could adopt their own versions of these to try to get closer to, or maybe even to try to exceed the standards set by USDA. But again, that assumes that we would have a robust carbon market, and that there would be competition in terms of trying to get the business from farmers and ranchers. And that depends on a lot of other things. Okay, for the what happens in Congress or what happens in DC, the House, they have to adopt their own version of this. Hopefully, it could be identical, or they could make some changes or some additions. And if there are some differences, then it goes to conference committee and they resolve the differences. And then if both the House and the Senate adopt to the same, pass the same thing in the end, then it would go to the president for signature. And USDA would start the study, and I forget, that I think they have 6 months to do the study after the law, or the studies, I should say, before after the bill is introduced into becomes law. And if that doesn't change, then we'd be getting that report from USDA, 6 months out after that. Say this is passed by Christmas, then it would be maybe May or June before we'd see these reports, and then the certification stuff would be getting going, and all of that. So a year from now, if things went well, and USDA this is funded adequately in USDA, so they have the money to get the job done, then we might see some people getting certified a year from now. But we'll just have to kind of keep our fingers crossed and watch the news on that. Okay, now I'm going to take a step back and try to put carbon sequestration in the larger global warming context, within the United States. I'm not taking a look at the world, but in the US. And the latest year that we have numbers for is 2019. And carbon sequestration for the whole United States from everything was 12% of total US carbon emissions. And so carbon sequestration, what we have through photosynthesis, with plant-based photosynthesis, that's taking 12% of the carbon out of the air, or enough carbon out of the air to be 12% of what we emit from, coal-fired power plants and when we drive our cars or trucks, and all that. So that's, so it's really important. I mean, if we didn't have that, then our job in becoming net carbon neutral would be, 12% harder than it is now. Now, of that 12%, 98% of that 12% comes from forests. And I was kind of blown away by that. But now I understand why most of the action in the carbon markets has been credits from forests, because that's where most of the carbon sequestration is going on. And, you expect the forests to be there for a long time. If they're not being actively harvested or something like that, then you could say, yeah, this is going to be there 20, 30, 40 years, before we need to, do something to do something with some of the trees and replant stuff like that. I'm not a forestry guy, you can tell, but anyway, that's, but that's a lot. And the remaining 2% is divided up between cropland, grasslands, and wetlands. And it's a little over 1% for croplands, a little under 1% for grasslands, and around 0.5% for wetlands, give or take a little bit. And, I really expect whether the president's climate package is adopted or not in Congress, we're going to see USDA programs that will provide some level of payment for farmers to implement practices to sequester carbon and otherwise reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How big that program is and what the payments will be depends on what's happening in Congress right now with the budget debate. And so, we won't know any details about that for a long time, but I think that we will expect that we can expect to see something like that. Okay, will there be a market? Will there be a carbon market for carbon credits in the future? Well, it depends. If the president gets his clean energy standard, which, well, it's got a different name now, but I'm still calling it the clean energy standard. If it's adopted, then there will be limits on carbon, indirect limits on carbon emissions in the electricity sector. And so that would drive a lot of the interest in carbon markets for quite a while. And so that would be, if you want an expanded carbon market for ag carbon credits, then you need to be rooting for these restrictions on these clean energy standards and reductions of carbon emissions in the electricity sector. If we don't see that, then the interest in the carbon markets is gonna look like it was before President Biden was elected. That is, there was no discussion of this, no public discussion of this, in 2019 or 2018 or 2017. But we're on a different path now, so we'll have to see. If we don't get a meaningful climate program enacted by the Congress, then the European Union and China will dominate the future climate discussions. We won't have any leverage to move China to pollute less, because we won't be doing as much as necessary to reduce our own carbon emissions. We're number 2 behind China in terms of carbon emissions. But if we don't do something like the clean energy standards, then our emissions are not going to decline very much or very fast, and global emissions won't either. And then that means that all the bad stuff that's happening now, associated with global warming, worse floods, worse hurricanes, worse droughts, worse wildfires, increasing sea level rise, accelerating Arctic sea melt, and that all of that will get worse. And so, we hopefully don't want to see that. What would that look like for Nebraska? Well, I'm pulling from a couple of reports that date back in 2014. The first one is a federal report, the one on the left. It's got the map of the United States on it that comes out, and it goes region by region and details climate impacts in terms of how successful we are in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the report on the right is the best single report that we have for climate change in Nebraska. And it's a great report. It's PDF. If anybody has trouble finding it, they can ask me and I'll send them a PDF. But if you just Google the understanding and assessing climate change implications for Nebraska, it'll take you, and you'll be able to the page, and you'll be able to download it. And this is a team of UNL scientists who took the information from the federal study and brought it down to Nebraska. And so they focused on Nebraska, and this is very helpful. And I'm gonna, I've done this for water, and so we'll just do a couple slides for looking at how climate change is likely to affect water and temperature in Nebraska. Of course, both of those are very important for crop production and livestock production. But on the left, this is the projection in terms of changes in water use without climate change, and we're in that blue, we're a nice blue color there for no change. On the right, we're in the medium brown. That's practically the whole state except the eastern edge, and that's 25 to 50% increases in water use with climate change. And these maps are from the federal study. Now here's the heat change, and we have days and nights. And the thing that is important is that even if we do a lot to try to deal with climate change, we will, it's going to get hotter. On the left, if we, with less emissions, we'll see maybe 2 weeks more hot weather. On the right, with more hot weather, it could be 3 or 4 weeks more hot weather. And same thing with the nights. And those of you who are with cattle production, those hot nights are bad. Bad for cattle, they don't gain as well and all of that. So it's not a very good thing. I'm going to go through these fast, but Dr. Wilheit, who was the climate guy for a long time until he retired, said that if you can remember back to the 2012 drought, that could be the new norm in Nebraska by 2041. if you remember that farmers, irrigators, the pivots ran the last 4 to 6 weeks continuously unless there was a breakdown, and so that would if we had something like that even every other year, we would see depletion, groundwater depletion. We would see red areas on the depletion map all over Nebraska, not just in the Republican Basin, but all over the state. And it wouldn't take very long for that to happen either. Here's just increases in temperature, so it's number of hot days over 100 a year. Let's pick Grand Island there in the middle of the state. They would, if we, on the low emission scenario, which we're way above in terms of emissions, it'd be 2 to 3 weeks more 100-degree days in Grand Island. And if we are in the high degree, it would be more like 4 weeks of days over 100 degrees. And that's a lot more hot weather, and similar increases all over the state. The water stuff would be pretty, hit the aquifers pretty hard. And as well yields would start to drop, we'd see changes in cropping, changes in the number of irrigated acres. If the well goes from 800 gallon a minute to 400 gallon a minute, that you're gonna have to make some pretty substantial changes in your operation. You're not going to get a full circle of corn in these dry years with a 400 gallon a minute well. So it will be, it'll be tough, and it'll be challenging. And so I will stop there. I've gone on pretty long, I think, but I think we've got time for questions. And so I will turn it back to Larry and let him do that, get me some of the questions.
All right, Dave, thanks so much. It's very interesting. Some of the questions that come in, they responded and said, well, you answered that question. So you did a good job of outlining what you've got. So if there's any questions out there, anybody has, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll send them to Dave. But Dave, maybe I ask you right off, has there been much discussion lately about moving from carbon markets onto this ecosystem services, for example, including water quality and some of these payments and stuff? Well,
I know that in some parts of the country, we have seen some of these water quality markets developed around nitrate pollution and sedimentation and stuff like that. I have not seen any of that being merged with carbon credit markets yet. I know that there are people who, the ecosystem services folks are, I believe, are monitoring what's happening in the carbon markets. I'm not sure that the folks in the carbon markets are paying much attention to the ecosystem services market. But there's probably a group or two out there who are following both.
All right. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. First of all, with regard to groundwater withdrawals, if we start to reduce groundwater levels, shouldn't the current NRD allocation system kick in and stop withdrawals?
Well, there are only a couple of NRDs that have restrictions on pumping. But yes, in the upper Big Blue, for example, I believe NRD, their groundwater restrictions are on, based on declines. How much has the groundwater declined from year to year? Once they hit a certain point, and I don't know if it's across the NRD or within subbasins or whatever, but once they hit a point, then that triggers the allocation. Now, it depends on whether it's a single year allocation or a multi-year allocation. If you've got a 10-inch or a 12-inch allocation, and then you've got one of these really bad years like 2012, and you pump 16 inches, can you do that and if you've got a 3-year allocation, can you overuse in 1 year and then cut back in the following years? That's what they have in the Upper Republican. I think theirs is a 5-year allocation. But not every NRD has an allocation system, what I'll call a standby allocation system in place. And so in some, it would for sure if they had that standby allocation system on the books, but not everybody has that. And so not all the NRDs have that. But I would expect that if they saw the declines, they would probably feel a need to move in that direction.
All right. Next question. If a carbon fee were adopted, how would that affect carbon markets?
Well, it would depend on how the fee system was set up. But if, in the simplest terms, if you could use a verified and maybe a USDA certified carbon credit to offset some of the carbon emissions that you have the carbon fee on, and if I can buy the carbon credits cheaper than the fee is, then that would be an opportunity for the carbon markets. But it depends on those relative prices, and it depends on whether that would even be an option for reducing your carbon tax or your carbon fee or not. It depends on how those are set up. In some states, they're very, so far they've allowed the forest credits to offset some of the, say, power plant carbon emission reductions that they have to meet. But they limit it to like 5% or 10% of the total, so that it's not the whole thing. But we don't have a national market yet. We don't have national rules yet, and so each market is different. They do it different in New England and the East Coast than they do it in California. So we'll just have to wait and see what the fine print is on those.
Okay. So do you foresee ag carbon credits outpacing the demand to purchase the credits? And what is your take on what happens then?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I think if there's more credits offered for sale than there are buyers willing to buy them, then I think the prices are going to go down, just like corn or cattle or anything else. One of the reasons I'm looking forward to this, hoping that 1251 becomes law, is so that we would have that USDA study, and it would provide a definitive answer, I think, to that question.
Right.
But all I can do is speculate, and I'm not the economist, so you should discount my speculation pretty heavily.
That's a good answer for a non-economist, Dave.
Thank you.
So here's an interesting thought. Does it appear that the Chinese will be purchasing credits in the U.S. to offset their own CO2 burning?
Well, that's up to the Chinese. I mean, that's if their policy for carbon emissions allow that, and our carbon credits would meet the test, then, assuming that there's not a lot of diplomatic red tape and stuff like that, there's nothing to prevent the Chinese from coming in and buying carbon credits on the U.S. market. There's nothing really preventing it right now. So that would be up, but that would be up to them. But if they saw that as something to help them comply with UN commitments and stuff like that, I'd say sure, it could happen. And of course, if that did happen, that would be a game changer. Then the carbon market would explode.
Okay.
So keep your fingers crossed.
All right, Dave, a request for you to comment more on how you think a USDA carbon bank system might be integrated with private carbon programs. In other words, is there a way for USDA to set the rules and then get private money?
Well, okay, I thought that question was going in a different direction. I'm not sure I can answer the way it ended. The carbon bank one nice thing about the carbon bank is that you get paid for stuff, for continuing stuff that you couldn't sell on the private carbon markets. So if I already have conservation tillage, I could get the USDA carbon bank could give me a payment for continuing my conservation tillage, even though it's not a new practice for me. If it's new practice, I might get some payments, some extra payments, to kind of cover the implementation part of it. But then, I would get the same payments as people who have been doing it for 10 or 15 years. It's the way I would see that playing out. Now, could the USDA come up with a carbon market that could get private funds into it? The way I see that probably playing out is that farmers who participated in the carbon bank would not be precluded from selling carbon credits that they might generate, even though they're already getting USDA payments. So there would be the opportunity to stack, USDA payments, NRCS payments, carbon bank payments, selling carbon credits. I think the opportunity would be there to stack those payments on top of each other. But and Vilsack, Secretary Vilsack, if I'm remembering correctly, has said that his image of how USDA carbon bank would not preclude farmers from participating in private carbon markets. In addition, he didn't see them as being competitive. He saw them as being complementary. So they would pay for things that, don't get you carbon credits, but they would also probably pay for things that would get you carbon credits, but you should still be able to sell the carbon credits. Now that's speculation, but that's how I would see it playing out.
All right. Another one. I know there are a lot of variables involved, but what would or could a farmer receive per acre for selling carbon credits?
Well, the number that I see being used by ag economists who are, studying, what farmers might get and stuff, $15 a ton is a number that's bandied around a lot. Now, in Nebraska, I don't think we have any soils where you could sequester an additional ton per acre per year. I'm not absolutely sure about, I'm not the agronomist, but that's my understanding. And so, you're looking at maybe 2 or 3 acres to get a ton, so that's maybe $5 an acre. And I don't know if that $15 if that's the net from the sale, or if that's, you have to pay the selling fees and stuff like that. And so you end up with $12 instead of $15 per ton. And then that's $4 an acre. But I would say $4, $5, $6 an acre might be a decent guess.
Okay. Well, Dave, it looks like we're out of questions at the moment. So thanks again. Appreciate it. We'd like to make sure everybody to look for the recording of today's webinar, along with many other resources relating to carbon markets, on the Center for Ag Profitability's website, which is cap.unl.edu. If you could please take a brief moment to complete the short 3-question evaluation at the link provided in the chat box, we would really value your feedback. Be sure to check cap.unl.edu for an updated schedule of more upcoming webinars. Next Thursday at noon, we'll have a presentation on cover crops and the benefits to soil health and financial incentives associated with their use. That will be with Maria Bauman, an economist with USDA's Economic Research Service. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.